You know, I have had several of you make the suggestion for me to go to Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. Now that I have been, I know why. It was just a phenomenal place to visit, full of history. Today we're going to be visiting some famous graves. I'm going to be bringing you some more long-form videos in the future from this place, but the history, the architecture, I mean, this was very Victorian, and today we're going to go there. Please join me as we go to Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. And even from the opening sign, when you first go in, you can see almost just an element of mystery right at the beginning. I love this Hollywood Cemetery sign and the fact that it is dated and it is old. I absolutely love it, as well as the fencing and the gates, the columns. Everything just combines together for a very unique and interesting trip to Hollywood Cemetery. And Hollywood Cemetery was established in 1847, and it is 135 acres located on the James River in Richmond, Virginia, the state capital of Virginia. And I will say this, everything just added to this visit, even the office. You can see that their office, very beautiful. And I believe I read also that there was a chapel that was added to this building as well. But you can just see, I guess it's a Victorian style. I'm not exactly sure, but it looks Victorian to me, and it just gives you a sense of history and mystery. And we're going to be looking into a few things today, talking about a few of the legends of Hollywood Cemetery, as well as visiting some famous graves. There's actually a couple of U.S. presidents buried in here. We're going to visit their grave, and I'm going to be doing a future videos on those as well, on those graves. But I wanted to at least take a small look while we were here today in Hollywood Cemetery. Just see here as we look through the cemetery, just so many sites, and really everywhere I went, it seems like every road, every corner that we turned was just full of something, history and architecture that I wanted to share with you. So you can just see as we stroll through the cemetery here, just what a phenomenal place this is to visit. And honestly, this is one of my favorite cemeteries that I have ever been able to visit. I am so glad to be able to bring this to you on my channel. And I cannot overstate this enough. Everywhere we went, every road, like I said, just everywhere we went, there was something to see in this cemetery. And that brings us to this. I wanted to make sure that I was able to show you all this. This is actually a monument to the Confederate war dead. It was erected in 1869, and it is 90 feet tall. Didn't exactly know what it was when I went there, but it was just a massive part of the cemetery and a massive part of the skyline in the cemetery. So I wanted to make sure that I showed you all this. And I mean, here's the thing, and I understand that I cannot show you everything as far as this cemetery goes because it is massive. It's 135 acres. So there's places that myself visiting I wasn't able to see, but I figure seeing a little bit is better than seeing none. So I wanted to make sure I show you some of the sites of the cemetery. This is the Iron Dog, and the Iron Dog stands guard over the grave of a girl who died in 1862. Different theories out there as to why and how this dog came to be, although the most popular and probably the correct theory is that, you know, they wanted to melt the steel down to use in the war efforts. And the story is that the dog was saved and brought here to stand guard over this grave of a girl who died in 1862, and whatever the reasoning, it makes for a great story now. And I love the legends and the lores associated with cemeteries, and you can find those in nearly every cemetery you go to. It may take a little, it may take a little digging, but you can generally find that. Also, I wanted to mention the Hollywood Cemetery was put on the National Register of Historic Places in 1969, so it's been on that registry for quite a few years now. And different types of stones that you'll see in here, some more modern stones, mostly older ones though, because this is definitely an older cemetery established in 1847, so that just kind of highlights the age. This was probably my favorite part of the cemetery, President's Circle. Those of you familiar with me and my channel know I'm a presidential historian of all parties. I just like the history associated with the presidents. The first grave that we're going to visit here is the grave of President John Tyler, President of the United States, 1841 to 1845. An interesting piece of history on John Tyler: his death is the only presidential death to not be recognized by Washington, D.C. And why is that? Very simple answer. He gave an allegiance to the Confederacy. And when you give an allegiance to the Confederacy, that is not going to go over well in Washington, D.C. So, John Tyler, some history there for you. James Monroe was a former president, and he is buried here in a sarcophagus, and locally his grave is known as the birdcage. If you look at it, you can definitely see why it does resemble a birdcage. Both of these presidents I'm actually going to do a long form video on in the future. Anytime I visit the grave of a president, I like to do that, to go into the history, their lives, their administration, and take a look at them. Just love the presidential history. You know, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I am going to do some more long-form visits on this place. There are just so many pieces of history and phenomenal stories to visit from here. So look very forward to bringing that to you in the near future. As previously mentioned, Hollywood Cemetery sits on the banks of the James River in Richmond, Virginia. So right now, and you can see that, I mean, really the cemetery overlooks this river. We're going to take a few looks at some of the landscape here that you'll find around it, and this river just makes this very picturesque, very beautiful. So I wanted to show you all that, and you can just see here again, look at some of these stones, look at the age on these. You just do not see new stones being made this way, and it just highlights the age of this cemetery, which I love. As I mentioned, you know my channel, I've been to a lot of cemeteries. I was at Arlington National Cemetery, which was one of my previous videos on this same trip. This is on the same trip that when I went to Arlington, but this cemetery really surprised me. I know that I have had a lot of people ask me to go here. I can see why. This has quickly become one of the favorite places of mine that I've visited. So to be able to bring this on my channel is something that's really special to me, really important to me, and I'm so glad that you all are here with me watching this. Richmond, Virginia, a ton of history associated with Richmond. Here we are at the James River, still in Hollywood Cemetery, looking at the sites. There are a few more places I'm going to show you on this. Another famous grave that we're going to visit before we go. This is still kind of part of that President's Circle that you'll see, and that's Monroe. If you look kind of under the trees there, that's Monroe's grave back under that, and then you can see Tyler's there to the right. So glad to be able to visit the graves of these former presidents. The presidential history is something that I love. I love to read about it, love to study it. I don't think there's a better museum that you can visit for history than in a cemetery. I just think it gives you all of the components to be able to tell good stories. And I wanted to again show you another sign for President's Circle at Hollywood Cemetery. I'm going to show you some more sites here. And just look at the fencing, the gates and everything here, just things you don't see nowadays. Just the ironwork that you'll see on that, along with the different types of stones that you'll see in this cemetery. And again, it just highlights the age, and you know, this is something that I love, being able to show you the age and the history of cemeteries. We do have another famous grave and another kind of a folk tale to check into. I'm going to be doing long form on this, on these two subjects as well. This is the grave of Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis was the one and only president of the Confederacy at the time that the Confederacy was defeated, and the United States became the United States once again. But we're going to do a long form video on him, as well as this next subject. If this was reported, and this is definitely a folklore that I'm looking forward to getting into. There is a story that of the Richmond vampire. And the Richmond vampire had something to do with this mausoleum that we're seeing now. A lot of stories associated with that, and I cannot wait to dig into that a little bit further in a long form video. The Richmond vampire, you were able to get a little bit closer to this mausoleum, but an interesting story on the way. I do want to thank you all for watching and for joining me today on this journey. Great visit, and I really appreciated being able to be here. Just so thankful to be able to make these journeys. I'm going to leave links in the description where you can find me: Facebook, Instagram, my merchandise store. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. All of my videos are 100% cemetery related, so all of my videos, I'm going to be either in a cemetery or telling you about a cemetery, something to do with a cemetery. I just love history, and I love the history that a cemetery provides. Thank you all for joining me, and from Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia, I will see you again soon.